Welcome back to A Complete History of Manchester United. I'm your host, Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films, joined as always on this journey by the legendary football writer Paddy Barclay, author of the definitive biography of Sir Matt Busby and other Manchester United managers. Today we are going to be looking at the 1979-80 season. As you can see, moving into a new decade, so we've gone with the old grainy photographic footage there. We moved into the colour era. I know technically the colour era is before the 80s, but for the visual representation, I thought it started to finally move into colour.
It's a nice
and white.
Nice sunny day. Nice sunny day as well, Wayne. It's lovely. Just a typical Manchester day. That lovely.
With hot casserole being offered in below Paddy's head. Although Paddy is not offering the pot casserole.
No.
And that is obviously for the audio. That's a description for the audio. The video viewers can see exactly what I'm talking about. There's a picture of the Old Trafford forecourt, and as we often do on the video podcast, we put a picture of Old Trafford through the decade, pick a good one that represents the decade in question that we're entering. And we are indeed entering the 1980s. If you're watching this video, please give it a like and subscribe. Join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. If you are watching back as well or listening back, please do share the podcast on your different social platforms. It really helps getting the word out, and really, really appreciated by us. So, Paddy, we were talking about the 1979 Cup final last time round. Dave Sexton magnanimous in defeat. This is a strange season for United. Do you think that they're going to build on that? It looked at one point like Sexton was rocky, like he was going to be in a very difficult situation moving in to the summer, but the cup run kind of saved him, even though United lost on the day. So I guess the idea was that they would be in a position where they'd be challenging for the title, but really there was nothing in the cup final that suggested that they would. There was nothing in the season really that suggests that they're going to compete for the cup final, for the league until the last sort of 6 weeks of the season. So, I mean, and as well, the fact is that their sole summer signing, or their major summer signing, is Ray Wilkins. Now, Ray Wilkins comes in for a club record of 750,000 or 825,000. It was reported as both. And it seems like a strange one, because if you're saying that United are missing something, there's probably a goal scorer, probably some creativity. It wasn't someone who was going to put the foot on the ball in midfield. Obviously, United were missing that. It wasn't an obvious miss in terms of like that would be the first problem that you'd seek to rectify. So maybe for that, Wilkins wasn't as appreciated as he could have been from the off. What did you make of the Ray Wilkins signing in terms of what United needed at the time?
Yes, well, I just thought that if you're Manchester United, you need Manchester United quality players. You need style. You need class, and Ray Wilkins seemed to epitomise that. I mean, he'd come from Chelsea, and I was quite surprised when at Manchester United he became known as a sort of almost a holding midfield player, although that phrase wasn't known at the time. But he always struck me in his early days at Chelsea, some of them spent in the second division, as a sort of box-to-box player, not quite Brian Robson, but not far off. He scored some smashing goals. And mobility was one of his strengths, He was maybe swashbuckling be taking it too far, but he was an exciting player, as I recall it. Wilkins and Teddy Maybank, the blonde centre forward. They were known as Butch Wilkins and the Maybank Kid. After Butch Cassidy, and they were sort of. Kings Road gunslingers. It wasn't the main street of Laramie. It was just a place in London. But it was sort of part of Chelsea. And so when he came to Manchester, if we look back at him now, And we see this cautious, careful. I think this crab-like image is a bit unfair. But lovely passer, but a careful passer, a man who took care of the ball. And I was just looking back at the statistics before we went on air, Wayne, and it's quite interesting that he did in fact score a goal. One season he scored 11 goals in the league alone. Okay, second division, but that's 1 in 4. One or two strikers be happy with that. And it then went down to, I think, 7 in 38 the next season, but still not bad. Most midfield players would settle for 7 or 8 in a season, and in the final season before United bought him, is quite interesting. Only got 3 goals. So he appears to have changed his style and become more keen on providing and designing the play than in doing everything, include finishing it off just before he joined United. But I didn't quite spot that detail at the time. Yes, I mean, bear in mind, United's central midfield player in the season before had been McElroy and Macari, I think.
Yeah.
Little bit similar, little bit, both, no coincidence that both were capable of playing as strikers, second strikers, certainly. Do you really want that as your midfield? You want someone who will grab the play by the scruff of the neck. And that seemed to be what Ray Wilkins was willing to do. I thought it was a signing that made sense. Manchester United, a club like that should be buying Manchester United players. They bought, it appeared to do that when they went to Leeds and paid loads of money for McQueen and Joe Jordan a couple of years earlier. And this seemed, yet more further confirmation of Manchester United as a player who would look around, as a club who would look around the league and say, oh, yes, it'd be nice to cherry pick him. So, it seemed to make sense. And it enabled, I don't know, you'll tell me, was it McElroy or Macari who partnered him? Which one of them went back up front, and I can't remember which it was. I think it might be Macari.
Yeah, they switched. I know that they sort of played. I know McElroy generally stayed in midfield, so Macari would move back up front.
Macari was the one who went up front and supported Joe Jordan. So, there you are. I mean, Macari, I think Lou Macari was usually, would be most remembered as a striker, although he was certainly capable of playing midfield because he had a good football brain.
Yeah, the conversations that we've had with Sammy on this podcast before, but certainly all of the analysis that we've undertaken and the comments that have come in from the players around the time was that Macari and McElroy midfield was very much, it was a Doherty making anyway, so it was fit for that kind of frenetic pace of football.
I mean, Doherty seemed to think your holding player should be one of your centre backs stepping out. That was the Doc. 3 at the back. Heavens, that's enough. And 2 of the fullbacks had to be attackers.
Yeah.
So that seemed to be the. Why waste a player on a holding? A defensive. Waste a shirt on a defensive midfield player? Dave's view was sort of more rounded and less adventurous.
And it's probably a fair comment though with Wilkins. Wilkins in particular is a really good example of this because the idea is that everything Sexton did was pragmatic in comparison to Doherty. Well, really, like you said, Wilkins isn't a pragmatic signing. He's just pragmatic at the side of playing 2 attackers in midfield. That, if you call it pragmatism, although there will be 2 notable examples we'll come on to later in the season, it did work. It paid off because United were a lot more solid. They had 11 clean sheets in the league before Christmas, but it was on the road really where they had a few problems. They lost by 2 goals at Wolves, West Brom, City and Liverpool, and all comfortable defeats as well. They looked like, like one of those heavyweight boxing matches where you're not going to see a knockdown, but the favourite is just going to keep the challenger at arm's length and do that for 12 rounds. That's basically what United were like in these big games. So it undermined their hopes of progress. They had early cup eliminations as well. So by the turn of the year again, it's not again saying, oh, Sexton's on the brink, but it is kind of the case of how far is he able to take them? Is this the best that they're going to look under him? It wasn't ever a case of them looking better. They just looked a little bit more solid than they had in the previous season, where he tried to be pragmatic and it just hadn't worked with the players at his disposal. Wilkins, I guess, had added that solidity in midfield. The defenders, the defenders, McQueen, Jordan with his physicality, Thomas on the wing. They had added now a little bit more consistency to the play. And really, although, United weren't, looking fantastic, they were steadily sort of in the right area of the table and showing little signs of progress, just not enough to make it look like it was convincing to make such a bold change from Doherty to Sexton, because that was the barometer, wasn't it? It was always constantly being compared to what came before.
Correct.
Because United were never adventurers in the way that they had been under Doherty.
Yes, well, that's definitely true. On the other hand, we were moaning in the last episode that the defensive record was so poor, and I checked it before we and you were right. That United conceded 63 goals in the league in 1978-9. 63. Now in the season we're talking about, 35. Yeah. So he must have been doing something right. In that the structure of the team was not so porous as it had been the year before.
Yeah, and 35 would have been 29, and it would have been the best defence in the league, if not for one trip to Portman Road. United already eliminated in the cup competitions, and then they go to Portman Road. Not only do they lose 6-0, 6-0, that's not an aberration there. Well, it was from Manchester United's part, unfortunately, not mine. Manchester United lose 6-0 at Ipswich Town. Gary Bailey saves 3 penalties. One of them is a twice taken penalty. And that is the result, really, that sort of turns the tide a little bit, and it puts the spotlight on Sexton, because it sort of, while United are plodding along and moving in a generally good direction, defeat that horse is quite scary. And what was the reaction to it at the time? Because if United lose 6-0 today, obviously the crest is cracked on the back of a newspaper. Yeah, there are insights, and the inquests go on for weeks. So
well, United had a bad spell in that. What would it be? Early in the second half of the season, so maybe March. Would that be?
1st of March was the
first, right? Yeah, 1st of March. Well, around that time, United went 3 games without scoring. It was a really poor spell, and that result certainly rocked confidence, because as you say, they'd been solid, they'd been picking up results, they had a good start to this season, from what I can recall, about 7 or 8 games without defeat at the start of the season, and only 2 goals conceded, which was a marker to towards what would happen. And then suddenly 6 goals at Ipswich, and I know Ipswich were a good team, but I think they won the UEFA Cup, was it, around that time?
Yeah, it was the Bobby Robson side, wasn't it?
Bobby Robson. Yeah. So, I mean, they were a magnificent team on their day, but Manchester United, no team should be losing 6-0 and being lucky to get away with 6. No. So there was clearly something amiss.
Yeah, well, and we'll talk about the football in a moment, but the club did have other matters to concern themselves with, and maybe it was representative of the dark mood at the club, that kind of thing. Anyway, so
it was in the boardroom where Louis Edwards, the long-serving chairman and friend of Matt Busby, died unexpectedly I think he was in his bath, and he had a heart attack. He was at that time being pursued by a documentary crew from Granada over various things which did impinge on the club. Financial sort of irregularities alleged. And anyway, he must have felt under a lot of pressure, and whether that contributed to his death is not known. But there can be no doubting. There were he had his critics, like most club chairmen, but there could be no doubting his love for Manchester United for a start, which went back to way to the formative years of Busby. But it of the Busby Babes, but not just his that, but his efficacy as chairman, the modernization of the ground and so on. Yes, there's no doubt that he deserved a place in the Manchester United's history. A place, since we're talking about history, that was filled by his son Martin, who was also to serve with some distinction after taking over from Louis. That Martin was already on the board. Yes. Martin too, despite his detractors, those who characterized him as a middle-class public school boy who preferred hockey and rugby to football. Actually, he was as crazy a Manchester United fan as you, Wayne. I'm telling you, and thousands of others. You'll know enough from your dealings with him and your various books about the club over the years to know that this is not a bloke that you'd take on in a quiz about Manchester United without fear of getting a beating. So he yes, a mad keen Manchester United fan, and so Martin takes over from his father. He was installed around the time, just after the Ipswich match, as chairman, March 22nd. He was installed just 3 weeks after the Ipswich game. Yep. Although I don't think he'd take credit for the upturn in fortunes that was to follow.
No, but he would have certainly celebrated the day because it was a 1-0 win over Manchester City that marked the coronation, ascension to power of Martin Edwards. Yeah, you're definitely right about Martin. No owner, unless they're, ridiculously benevolent to the, to the reckless abandon of the tune of football supporters. They have to pull the purse strings at some point, and when he did that, obviously it was unpopular. But nobody can say he didn't invest and build the club and have a vision for the future, which as we'll come to in the series, others questioned as well. But he certainly put his money where his mouth was. He was rewarded for that as well. He's a businessman. Yeah. Let's not pull any punches with that, but he did have a love for United. I have spent quite a lot of time with Martin, as you have, and many conversations with him. He's the best way that I can sum up his knowledge on United is he'll sort of tease you with something. If he's telling you a story, he'll lead you into something and not necessarily tell you something incorrect, but he's kind of leaving the gateway open to make you can make an assumption. And he's testing you to see if you make the wrong assumption. He's testing you. Have you done your research? Do you know what you're talking about? And if it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. Thankfully, I didn't fall for it because I knew what he was talking about, and I think he appreciated my knowledge on the matter. I can't remember exactly what I'm talking about. They can be trivial things like a game that was played, a scoreline, an event that happened in a game. He'll do something like that, and he knows full well what he's talking about. But he's just luring you in to see if you know what you're talking about as well. And I appreciate that kind of knowledge, by the way. That kind of using your knowledge. I do appreciate that. So nobody can question that Martin wasn't a responsible owner for Manchester United, because he most certainly was. And he was I think, considering the difficult decisions that we've talked about with the club ownership in this series, I think in this situation, I think it was I think history proved it to be the right course, that he was the right man to come in. So United were on the ropes. He wouldn't take credit for his arrival being something of a catalyst for a change of fortune. But it was strange the way that the season did sort of reignite itself into life, because United in early April, Liverpool come to Old Trafford. They only really need a win to not mathematically secure the title, but make it official. They would only need one win after that, and there's like 6 games left. United, on the other hand, would need to win every single game and beat Liverpool. What turns out to be a sort of Indian summer for Jimmy Greenough. I don't even know if we call it that, because it's just one last hurrah, basically, in a Manchester United shirt. He's recalled into the side because Sammy McIlroy is suspended, and he and Mickey Thomas both score, as Greenough did, as they combined in the 79 semi-final. Now they combined to both get on the score sheet against Liverpool, win 2-1 in Paddy, a really eventful game at Old Trafford.
Oh, it was terrific. It was just as just as well one of the biggest, if not the biggest, crowd of the season. 60,000-ish were there to see it, because it was a terrific game. And I remember you mentioned that Liverpool went there thinking this is where we can basically plant the flag at the top of the league, and lay claim to it. And they took the lead. When Gordon McLean slipped, Dalglish ran on to score, so United had to come from behind, and as they did, with as you say, Mickey Thomas scrambling one past Ray Clements, and then Joe Jordan got a header that wouldn't have gone in, but for a cute little intervention by Greenough, who sort of backheaded it between 2 defenders on the line into the net. So they're in front of the Stretford end, I think, and so great joy, that United still didn't look as if they could take the league instead. But how nice to wipe that premature smile off Liverpool's face.
Yeah, a game notable. We were talking about pragmatism earlier and how it went to the wayside at Portman Road. You would not expect, possibly, I mean, everyone will remember Greenough and Thomas scoring against Liverpool, particularly Thomas, because it was great for him to score in that game after the criticism and the sort of pressure he'd been under. But the game I always remember it most for, I remember the game most for this ridiculous this passage of play, which is the worst. Now, if you're a student of football and you like total football, you will have studied the origins of total football, and you would have watched the 1974 World Cup, and you would have watched the Holland team hunting in packs, and you would have looked at that and you would have said, this is not total football, somebody's having me on. And then you would have watched it over the years evolve and become the sophisticated thing that it is today. When you watch what passes for Dave Sexton's offside trap in this game, you would think it is not. You would take it back under the trades description, because I don't really know how to describe it. But you watched it before, Paddy. So recount.
Basically, what happens is that Hansen brings the ball out of defence. Now, I was a great admirer of Alan Hansen. I thought he could. I know he was a great player, but I thought he could have been. I thought he could have been Beckenbauer, because he had this amazing ability on the ball. But rather like Rio Ferdinand in later years, he seemed to be programmed not to go that final, not to keep going, as one or two of the liberos of, in Denmark and even Italy were allowed to do. But anyway, on this occasion, Hansen comes forward and United rush forward to the halfway line to say, okay, you can stop and pass now, but you're not going to pass to anybody, because we're going to be on the halfway line. So anybody who's beyond us when the ball is kicked is going to be offside. The trouble is that the Liverpool players rush back too. And it's almost as if they've programmed this, that they knew this was going to happen because Hansen, it's a muddy pitch. Hansen flicks it up, flicks it up, volleys it through and chases his own pass, and he's through. He's right through on goal, and just as he's advancing on Gary Bailey, there's only two things he can do, and they're both easy. One, slip it past Gary Bailey into the net, or two, knock it sideways to Kenny Dalglish, who will then tap it into an empty net. Either were easy. He did it just a wee bit too late, and Dalglish is offside, but he still misses. It's a terrible miss. He's still, commentators often say, "Oh yeah, so glad to see that offside flag." Well, on this occasion, the offside flag was no hiding place. It was probably the worst miss of Kenny Dalglish's career, and the fact that he wouldn't have been awarded the goal anyway doesn't have anything to do with it. But it was a terrific passage of football. You were sort of implying that it was sort of playground stuff. I think it was a bit more than that. I think that both teams were actually thinking about it, and but yeah, it looked like the playground rather than the training field. I admit it, but I thought it was great to revisit. So I'm glad you mentioned it and brought it up on the show.
I'm glad that we were talking about it. When you look at it back, I think it's a terrific piece of play from Liverpool, first and foremost, because to open it up like that, sort of anticipate that kind of thing's going to happen, that suggests that United have done that once too often in the past, and they've got away with it every single time, or maybe not even being challenged in this kind of way. So Hansen's obviously been very inventive to do that. But how often do you see at that level, that that kind of space and time is afforded to a team, and they always screw it up? You never see a team open up another team like that. They take advantage of a flow, and then it all goes swimmingly. It all goes according to plan. There's always something that goes on.
It's true. What's the phrase? Yeah, that maybe that chance was just a little too easy.
Yeah. That's it's definitely one of those where a cliche could have been born, or at least cemented. Yeah, but it was a strange period because at least United win the game. And then from that moment, for sort of 4 or 5 weeks, it looks like Sexton's team are back in with a chance of winning the title because Liverpool drop a few more points in draws. And the funniest thing for me is throughout this run, you've got a win at Bolton, McQueen and Thomas scoring it. You've got a win at home to Spurs, Wilkins scores, and Andy Ritchie gets his next hat-trick. Joe Jordan scores twice at Norwich. Joe Jordan scores twice at home to Aston Villa. These are major kind of vindications for Dave Sexton at this moment in time. All of his players are playing this key and crucial role in the resurrection of United's closest. What it transpires is United's closest title push since they last won it in 1967. The penultimate game, Sammy McIlroy scores twice against Coventry. We talked about. I remember talking to him about it. He was kind of, I'm not dismissive of it, but hesitant to sort of commit and say, "Oh, it's the biggest league game of my career" at that point. Because I'm asking, it's the closest that he came to a title in effect, playing for Manchester United. What was the pressure like? And I think it was more to do with the fact that Liverpool always had this game in hand that would be played after the final game, after United had already wrapped up their league calendar. So they had to really depend on the results going their way. And it really depended effectively on United getting a result at Leeds on the last day, hoping that Liverpool slipped up, and then they would slip up in their final game as well. That didn't work out because Liverpool not only didn't slip up, United did, and they lost 2-0 to Leeds, who, by the way, had signed Brian Green off earlier in the season for a club record fee for United sale at 350,000, I think it was, something like that. So United finished second. It is theoretically the closest the club have come to winning the league since 1968, when they went on the last day to Man City. But even though, Paddy, they finished second, and this is on the back of a cup final, and it's a lot more Dave Sexton this season because you can see the impact and the influence of all of the players. You can see overall, you can see a definitely more prudent defensive system. it still doesn't feel like United are progressing, does it?
No, I know what you mean. They finished above, good teams at the time. Nottingham Forest. They finished above everybody except Liverpool. But the gap was closer. Well, the final margin, I think, was 2 whole points, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which suggests that just a marginal gain, and they'll be all right next season. But they did seem far away, and the fact that you recall that season as being one of respectability rather than threat, is quite telling. There was just a missing ingredient, and I think probably if you're looking for reasons, Steve Coppell's still there, Mickey Thomas is still there, McElroy and Wilkins are in midfield, and the back four is full of creativity with McQueen, Buchan, or class with McQueen and Buchan in the middle, Jimmy Nicholl, who's a good attacking player, and Albiston. Did Ashley Grimes play left back sometimes? I don't know.
Yeah, played a few games at left back, yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned him in the last episode, and I think he figured probably more than most fringe players.
Yeah.
So yeah, you would have thought. So you kind of look up front. Now, Joe Jordan's a leading goal scorer, with sort of 1 in 3, something like that. A good ratio for a striker who was never selfish in looking out for himself, but always seeking to bring others into play. He did well, but he wasn't Ruud van Nistelrooy, was he? He wasn't Dennis Law. He wasn't that absolute guarantee of goals that some of the great Manchester United centre forwards have. Wayne Rooney, you Carlos Tevez, you can go on about the ones who, you just know they're going to score. If they don't score one week, they'll score the next. Joe wasn't quite that. So, although he had other attributes, so perhaps that was an area that needed attention.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, United, without that Ipswich game, like I said, they would have been the strongest defence in the league, with 29 over 30 from Liverpool. But it is the attack, because Liverpool score 81, United get 65. But 65 isn't terrible over 42 games, but it's just that the numbers aren't really there from the attacking play.
It's what runners-up get, yeah. That's fair enough, yeah.
As we come to the squad statistics, actually, you'll see a really remarkable return from the midfield. It's a really strong return from the midfield, which makes probably makes that season a lot more competitive than what it otherwise would have done. We'll get onto those squad statistics now. Then I'll put up NIKOLA Jovanovic, but I'm going to go through the other defenders and the goalkeeper first. Gary Bailey's the ever-present for this season. Well, there are a couple of ever-presents, but Gary Bailey plays every single game, 47 in all competitions, obviously 42 in the league. Arthur Albiston, as you mentioned earlier, Paddy, Ashley Grimes does play some games at left back, so Arthur Albiston makes 28 appearances this season, 25 in the league. Martin Buchan, ever-present, 42 appearances in the league, and obviously every other game as well. Stuart Houston, obviously still suffering with the long-term repercussions of the leg break that kept him out of the 77 Cup final. 17 appearances, 14 in the league. That brings us on to NIKOLA Jovanovic, who's on the screen now. Signed for £300,000, which is a sizable amount, in January from Red Star. He made only a couple of appearances this season, one start and one substitute appearance. Really chronic back issues would put paid to his career, but Paddy, I mean, £300,000, NIKOLA Jovanovic, Red Star Belgrade. It was United's first foray into the foreign market. I know we've debated over the other, like Carlos Sartori, Ed McElvenney. We've talked about different players way back over the time and sort of said this might be United's first foreign player, technically, on the technicality. But NIKOLA Jovanovic is widely sort of seen as that player because he was the first foreign signing. What were the expectations? Because £300,000, like we said earlier, it's a lot of money.
Well, yes, it was, but I mean, he came with a hell of a reputation. Unfortunately, he didn't come with a medical certificate, but he did have a fantastic reputation. He was a big lad, so you wouldn't think he'd be troubled by, by the physical side of the English game. He was a very good technician, but because of his back issues, he couldn't run, and it turned out to be a disastrous signing. I'm not sure quite what the intention was with in buying him, because I mean, Gordon McQueen had just been bought for a huge fee a couple of years earlier. Martin Buchan was still only 31.
Yeah.
And maybe he felt, that Martin wasn't going to last forever, and that was why Jovanovic came. Excuse me. I mean, he might even have been thinking that Jovanovic could play left back. I don't know, but we never found out because Jovanovic was never fit enough.
Yeah.
To show us this potential. He, as I say, he'd come with a very, very good pedigree. He'd been in the Red Star, a very, very good, career with Red Star Belgrade. He's one of the top men of the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
But after Manchester United, that was it. He was he went on loan to some small club in Titograd.
Yep.
And that was it. He was finished by in his early 30s. So yeah, we'll never know. It's almost as if he never really existed for Manchester United.
It is a strange one, considering. Well, a strange one. It's a sad one because of the fact that it came from Red Star and the United's, that they made the first foreign signing from there.
Yes,
you would have liked it to have obviously for sentimental reasons. It would have
yes,
been
because of Munich. Because of Munich, yes.
The other defenders, Kevin Moran makes 9 appearances in the league, scores a single goal. Jimmy Nicol makes every single appearance, 47 in all competitions, 42 in the league. Steve Patterson with 1 substitute appearance in the league, 2 appearances in all competitions. He said Gordon McQueen earlier, a tremendous season for McQueen. 9 goals in 37 games, 9 in 33 in the league, which is like pretty close to Joe Jordan's goal scoring record. Not bad. Like I said, a midfielder would be happy, and several of Manchester United midfielders were actually happy with their goal scoring return. And we'll start with Ray Wilkins, who got 2 in 42, so it was a low goal scoring season for him. 2 in 37 in the league. We've already talked, wax lyrical about his qualities. Deep line midfield playmaker before that term became fashionable. Like I said, possibly watermark to the water carrier, holding midfielder, and he wasn't really that kind of player. He was a player who was responsible on the ball. He'd been Chelsea captain at 18. He was a bit of a pin-up player, a little bit like Jovanovic as well. They were dashing-looking lads. Well loved in football as well, Ray Wilkins, an absolutely marvellous footballer, and a bit of calm to bring in a Mr. Chaos, a very Dave Sexton signing for the middle of the park. And ironically enough, he would flourish over the next couple of seasons. You mentioned the crab remark earlier. That was very unfairly given to him by Ron Atkinson. Ron Atkinson was actually quite happy for Ray Wilkins to play in his midfield and be a crab because he provided some of the nicer cup final moments, if I remember quite rightly. And I do remember.
You do.
Ray Wilkins, fantastic player, and a good start to his United career. Steve Coppell, you mentioned his everlasting consistency. In fact, he was in the middle of a record-breaking, consistent run of appearances 42 appearances in the league, in 8 goals, 9 in 46 in all competitions. Ashley Grimes moonlighting in different positions, notably down the left. 3 goals in 27 appearances, 3 in 26 in the league. 6 of those were substitute appearances. Lou McCarry, he has moved back up front, so 9 in 44, 9 in 39 in the league. But yeah, some of those as a striker, some of those in midfield. Chris McGrath, 1 single substitute appearance. Sammy Mack, a decent return of 8 goals in 45, 6 in 41 in the league. Tom Sloan, 5 league appearances, 4 of those substitute appearances, and those were his appearances for the season. Mickey Thomas, 10 goals in 40 games, a really good return, actually. Well, if we're not comparing him to the abnormally high return of Gordon Hill from the wing, 10 in 40 from out wide is a really strong return, 8 in 35 in the league. That brings us to the forwards. Jimmy Greenough, like I said, I say in Indian Summer, it was that single game where he scored against Liverpool. That was his single goal of the season in 5 games. One of those was a substitute appearance, all of those in the league. Joe Jordan, as Paddy mentioned earlier, 13 goals in 36 games, 13 in 32 in the league. And that brings us finally to Andy Ritchie. I didn't have the screen grab for him last time, so I'm now giving him his moment in the sun there. 3 goals.
Another fine head of hair.
Yeah. To make me incredibly envious, Paddy, on our challenge side of the podcast.
But Andy was to acquire our haircut, Wayne.
Yeah, he was, and yeah, I'll remind him of that next time I see him. I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. Yeah, Manchester-born lad. He had starred in the reserves. He'd scored a hat-trick for England schoolboys before he broke into the United side with that hat-trick against Leeds last season. So just 3 goals this season, and ironically enough, it's a hat-trick again against Spurs. That's 3 goals in 11 games, 3 in 8 in the league. The tactics for this season is a 4-4-2. Gary Bailey in goal. I had Stepney in my notes. I don't know why he's long gone. Jimmy Nicholl, ever present at right back. Buchanan McQueen at centre back. Albiston really the number 1 choice at left back, even though Grimes did play there on occasion. And you've got Coppell, Wilkins, McCarry, Thomas in midfield. Oh, sorry, McElroy and Thomas, and McCarry and Jordan up front. United's colours this season were red and white. They did away with the black kit, but the red and white kit from the mid-70s have sort of stayed there. Kit colours throughout, but the blue kit that was there for the last couple of seasons has gone. The United review is the same as last time. I believe it is. Anyway, I'll double check that, and if it's wrong, I'll get the both of next season's United reviews up for the next season. The average attendance, Paddy, up 51,557. Is there a reason for why? I mean, obviously, it's a surprise to see it go up by 5,000 on average this season.
Yeah.
Is there a reason? We know why it was progressively going down. Is there an explanation for the jump going back up?
No, the only thing I can think, I've been trying to work this out, and the only thing I can think of is that after the previous season, which was such a disappointment, although it could have been rescued by if they'd managed to hold on to the cup, managed to hold on to stop Arsenal from stealing the cup, then. But by and large, partly because of that, it was a disappointment, and there was genuine signs of progress. I mean, the fact that you're able to reel off the team 4-4-2, apart from Albiston and Grimes, pretty well everybody was up there in the maybe not the 42 like Jimmy Nicholl and 1 or 2 others, Gary Bailey maybe, but they pretty well all of them were ever present. It was as settled a team as you could imagine. That in itself suggests that things weren't so bad as the odd aberration such as Ipswich would suggest. That's the only thing, and the fact that they were in contention. I think that's really what, after the years and years and years of, for one reason and another, recurrent wilderness. I think that the Old Trafford crowd felt, we might just be getting somewhere this time.
Yeah, there was a transfer rumor over the summer that Dave Sexton was very keen on signing Liam Brady to add to the midfield to partner him with Ray Wilkins. So I guess that would have been at the expense of Sammy McElroy, although Sammy insisted that he knew nothing about that. Though it was a speculation throughout the summer until Liam Brady moved elsewhere. But elsewhere in football,
he went to Juventus.
Yeah. Eventually, that's where he ended up, and a lot of players were making that move at the time because the wages that were on offer in Italy were astronomical compared to what they were in England, and players could make considerable. Well, they could make retirement funds within weeks of being there, as opposed to the salaries. Especially the United. There was a story later on in the decade about Norman Whiteside. United. I guess one thing that we don't really talk about on this podcast is that United were notorious underpayers for their young players. The young players had criminally low salaries. They bring in a player from elsewhere in the league and they'd be paid a comparative salary. They'd look decently paid, but the younger players, it was kind of like, you've got the privilege of being part of lineage, and that's the price that you pay for it. It seems a bit strange, but later on in the decade, Norman Whiteside would sort of take the club to task on that and almost not hold them to ransom, but kind of like call their bluff with it, because AC Milan had put a fair amount of money on the line for him. But even that didn't really stop United's policy, because it went well into the late 90s until I think it was David Beckham's sort of brand explosion that transformed how United addressed dealing with the younger players, the homegrown players, because as far as I can remember, it was a matter that was never really completely resolved, and it's probably to some extent still in place today, that the club not take advantage of it. I don't think that's the wrong way to say, but certainly sort of lean on that privilege.
Yes, I suppose it's not totally unique to United, that, but I suppose I don't know if that's what Mr. Lingard would say, but we can't put words in his mouth. But I suppose, yes, that there's always a temptation, because let's face it, if you get players from elsewhere, you have to pay, especially if there's somebody else that wants them, and if they're at the level that Manchester United aspires to, then somebody else probably will want them. So, but it became, I think really the class of '92, it became really obvious that those were the most, especially after Eric Cantona left, that those the Beckhams, Scholes, Giggs, the Nevilles, Nicky Butt were the most important players at the club after Cantona had gone.
Yeah,
and that therefore, they had to be looked after as well as the imports.
Yeah, long way off on this series though, that's for sure. And let's talk about European success for other teams. Good grief, this is a really, in terms of English football, this is a great season. In terms of Manchester United, maybe not. Liverpool winning the league title, obviously, because they're ahead of United. West Ham with Stuart Pearson in the ranks, winning the FA Cup. Pearson left for United, left for West Ham earlier in the season.
Was that against Fulham? Yeah,
that was is it Trevor Brooking, the famous cup final?
Against Ipswich.
I'll just double check that for the listeners.
Anyway.
Of the podcast. 1980 FA Cup final is West Ham Arsenal at Wembley. And
West Ham Arsenal, Trevor Brooking's bullet header from 2 yards. Yeah.
Stuart Pearson in the team, having won the cup a couple of years earlier with United. League Cup is won by Wolves, and if I'm not wrong, that's Wolves and West Ham's last trophies today as well, or serious trophies at least. Nottingham Forest win the European Cup. Paddy, we'll just come back to that in a second. Arsenal get to the European Cup Winners' Cup after defeating United in the FA Cup, but they lose the final on penalties. Derby are relegated just 5 years after winning the league. But we are a history podcast, a football history podcast as well. We've talked about Forest being in the second division with United. We've talked about them going, oh, if only, that had been us in that position. United feeling a little bit disgruntled, that they could have been in that position. I know that it's a well-trodden story. Everyone knows, probably everyone listening to this knows of the Nottingham Forest Brian Clough journey. Tell us just a little bit before we close out on how special that was and why it was so special.
What, Brian Clough?
Yeah, Forest.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, he'd already done it at Derby County. I think he and Peter Taylor, I mean, when a lot of people, use the word genius in management, and they've obviously, the question's been asked about Alex Ferguson, is he a genius? Well, I used to say no, he wasn't a genius compared with Busby, but I think, the more you look at that longevity and the fact that he saw off, all the money, the batterings from the money of Chelsea, saw that off, saw off the initial assault of Manchester City. Welcome to Manchester, and he I think, yes, he was a genius of longevity and resilience. Busby was a genius because of his creation. But Busby, in the case of Busby, you have to say, and I'm sure you won't argue with me on that Busby without Murphy, would he have been a genius without Jimmy Murphy? You just don't know. And the reason I'm going through that preamble is that Clough's genius was in tandem with Peter Taylor.
Yeah.
When Clough was with Peter Taylor, that undoubtedly added up to genius, because the success that Alex Ferguson eventually achieved after coming down from Aberdeen to Manchester United took much longer than Clough's success at Derby and at Nottingham Forest. So there was sort of a little more of an element of magic about Clough and Taylor. So yeah, I mean, to do it twice with a substantial but not huge club is just further evidence of genius. And I mean, if you can sort of imagine, I'm just trying to think of the magnitude. Suppose that West Bromwich were to come up into the Premier League in 2 years' time, and then to win the Premier League in their first season, and then to win 2 European Cups. You'd think, well, whoever's in charge of them, is just phenomenal. People say it couldn't happen these days, but Clough made it happen in those days, and it was still absolutely remarkable. I remember after the first European Cup win, which was against Malmo, the semi-final was against Cologne, and they won the second leg 1-0 after drawing 3-3 at the City Ground. And they came back. I think they played Ipswich the following Saturday at the City Ground, and the crowd was 15,000. Well, I mean, it wasn't entirely unprecedented. Ajax, who were in their small stadium at that time, probably didn't get that much more when they were winning it 3 times in a row. But it still was an incredible achievement, and to go head to head with Liverpool as Forest did for several years was just incredible. And it was all done really with very selective buying. I mean, a lot of the players were free transfers or odds and sods, but they were odds and sods who fitted into the pattern.
Yeah.
So would you like to have seen him go to Manchester United at any stage, Wayne?
It would have been interesting because of the character, but every time you have that conversation, especially with Martin Edwards, they've always immediately said that it was never on the table, the conversation. I think it's one of those things where you just, as a football fan, you admire the story of it. You know, you don't have to attach it to your own team all the time. You don't have to, look at everything in the context of your own side. But yeah,
I think it's sometimes there's a feeling that that a really big club doesn't need a person of that brashness. I mean, Manchester United. There were two reasons I think that Manchester United fought shy of Mourinho for a few years before they got him. One was the style of play, which was perceived as too pragmatic, too Dave Sexton-like, if you want to bring it up to date with the program. And two was the feeling that he would put himself above Manchester United, as indeed seemed to happen on that day. Do you remember when you won the game, you won the final at Wembley, and he looked as if had a face like the proverbial smack backside, So it was. And it was the same with Clough, but Matt Busby didn't like Clough very much. And it was the brashness he didn't like. In Matt's day, and Matt's very much the father of the modern Manchester United, in Matt's day, brashness was not the virtue it's seen as today.
Yeah.
It was seen as a fault, as a flaw. And whereas now, unless a manager is punching the air every 10 minutes and putting on a attitudinous expression, like people love this Antonio Conte. I mean, I don't know what Matt would have thought of his antics, but Matt didn't like him, and Matt was still influential in 79-80. I mean, Matt was, I think Ray Wilkins once told me that during a time when things weren't going well for him at Manchester United, he was sitting in the canteen with his head in his hands almost, and he felt this hand on his shoulder and this Scottish brogue saying, "Son, you're a good player. Don't forget that." And it lifted him. He said his form came back from then. That was all he said. "Son, you're a good player." Yeah, I think there was a general feeling that Clough, that Clough just wouldn't fit in with the Manchester United way, in which the manager is the servant of the club. Even Ferguson, who had a huge ego, and Matt, who had an ego. Not that you would have known it, but they always behaved as if it was the club first. Even when Ferguson was ranting at referees, you never thought he was ranting at referees because he was worried about his bonus. He was he was battling for Man United. You know what I mean? Yeah. And there was a feeling that maybe with some of those other people that that Manchester United wouldn't come first. So I suppose that's a long-winded way of saying why he never.
Yeah,
why it never got anywhere close to happening.
Well, one thing is for sure, they would have been wanting to take inspiration from Forest moving into the next season. Their boldness, their ambition, and their daringness to dream. And we'll see if United do that in their next Sexton season, next season under Dave Sexton, which will be his fourth in charge of the club. And hopefully this time he'll get it right. That's it for this time, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you're watching back on YouTube, give us a like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to give us a review on the platform you're listening on. We will be back to discuss that 1980-81 season. Until then,